Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Please welcome this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening from the different sides of the world that you are joining from. We are very excited to have you on board. Considering this is the first edition of the annual meeting for the Rural Water Supply Network. This comes up as a result of discussions on improving the overall governance and organization of how the network undertakes its role. So very excited to have you on board. My name is James Origa. For those who we haven't interacted with before, I am privileged to serve as the chair of the network. I'm very excited to have you on board. I think as we start, I would want to kindly request if we can introduce yourself, probably in the chat, who you are and where you're joining from, so that you can know who's in the meeting as we start off the discussions. That would be lovely. Thank you, Marty. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat so that we know each other who is in the meeting. I'm very excited to welcome all of you. I want to mention that we have translation going on. The webinar is multilingual. There's a simultaneous translation into English and French happening at the same time. So you can go ahead and choose your preferred language. How to do this? Just click on if you can see the interpretation icon on the bottom control bar, it can be hidden somewhere under the more button. So just click on more and get it there. Then you select the language you're more comfortable with to join the meeting. I'm joining myself from Nairobi here. So thank you very much for coming on board. A few housekeeping issues that I like to point out to you. The meeting is being recorded. The recording and the presentations will be shared with the network members afterwards. So please go ahead, continue. I can see a number of colleagues already introducing yourself. Indicate your organization as well and the country where you're joining from in the chat box. As the discussions progresses on and the different members share their presentations, please you can share your questions and comments in the chat box as well. I also want to remind you at the end of the session this morning, there's a short survey which we'll kindly request you to fill out, just to let you know that to manage the different time zones and the number of presentations, we're having 2 rounds of this annual meeting session. We have this one happening this morning from 10 is Nairobi time to around 12:15. Then we'll have another one happening at around 5 Nairobi time later in the evening. You're still free to join even the other one if you wish to. It's still open for you to join. I just want to reiterate my personal excitement and appreciation of the opportunity to join the Network Executive Committee as a chair. I had given an indication of what my thoughts are on what you can achieve as a network. In the quarterly newsletter that was shared not long ago, we are all practitioners in this space, and we are fully aware of the issues that is facing the sector. Very good progress has been made in expanding water supply, the coverage, the infrastructure itself over the past decade. But the issue of non-functionality is still a remaining risk, that a lot of the infrastructure that have been constructed become non-functional. And there's a myriad of factors that is contributing to this. So I think this is something that we must collectively own and find a solution on how we can address this. And to be able to do that, my thinking, at the top of my mind, two approaches that I think would be really useful. First is adopting a duty of care mindset, having this extended commitment beyond infrastructure, thinking a lot more about service delivery. I always say that, families and communities don't need pipes. They need water that comes out of those pipes. And that means that we have to have a commitment that ensures that, we fix the institutions that will keep these pipelines running. And so I think it is very important that you all have that duty of care mindset to be able to keep, these pipes functioning and be present and supportive, offer the necessary technical assistance we can to communities beyond the actual infrastructure development itself. And secondly, beginning from a sustainable design mentality fee, with it, sort of thinking of a systems approach where we think a lot more of the sustainability in the long term, so that when you're designing the systems, how the kind of engagement, stakeholder consultations you are having with the communities, the whole process has an embedded sustainability within. So my vision as chair of the network is really to work with all of you, the theme leaders, all members of the network, to bring all, the knowledge that we have from the different corners of the world and contribute to change, keeping communities at the center of our work and making sure that what we do is sustainable, in the long run. So I'm very excited to join you, to bring more to light the work that we are all doing from the different corners of the world. I know we are all doing very amazing things. I think the value add of this network is to bring all of that, into the global space, so that we can share the knowledge and everybody can tap into our experiences. So I want to again say thank you so much for joining this morning. I think we just jump straight into it. I want to request Sean from the Secretariat. Sean, please, if you introduce yourself and then take us through the next session of this morning. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, James, for that super introduction. I think that really sets the ground very, very nicely in terms of what RWSN is about, what we're all trying to do collectively. And now I want to just take a few minutes to introduce to you our network strategy from 2024 to 2030, which will explain a bit more about what RWSN is, what we do, and why we do it, and why you are all part of this movement for achieving universal access to safe drinking water. So first of all, why do we exist as a network? Well, it's because 550 million people of the 703 million people worldwide who lack access to even basic drinking water services live in rural areas. And we work globally to bring rural water professionals together to share, learn, and collaborate so that rural water services are universally accessible, safely managed, and resilient and sustainable by 2030. So that, in one sentence, tries to capture what it is we're about, and hopefully that's something that's of interest to you, and that's why you're here this morning. So thank you very much to everyone that's joined. It's so lovely to see so many of you have joined us. So the next part is our vision and mission. So our vision is of a world in which all people enjoy safely managed water services that are resilient and sustainable. A change from our previous strategy is that we've actually taken out the word rural. And the reason for that is that it's to acknowledge the fact that people in the rural areas are often stewards of watersheds, of catchments, of aquifers, of landscapes that on which urban populations rely. So it's actually the role of the rural people is not just about access to water for people in rural areas, it's also for people in towns and cities as well. Our aim as a network is to improve the quality of rural water services and their management. And our mission is that we're a professional knowledge network that provides a convening space for individual professionals and organizations to share experiences, collaborate, develop guidelines and standards, curate knowledge, and promote lifelong learning in the rural water sector. And we inspire and support more women to become active at all levels of decision making. Our values are that people are at the heart of solving rural water supply challenges, and we're an open network that encourages belonging by mutual respect and trust. Through listening and learning and collaborating are core to eliminating poverty and unsafe water access. And we lead by example with professionalism, high quality work, integrity, and a focus on water user needs. And we acknowledge that everyone is a problem solver and is agency, but that structural and systematic hindrances and inequalities exist. And that solving complex challenges requires a diversity of voices, backgrounds, experience, and benefits from interdisciplinary working within and between organizations. And really, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge our two former chairs who have sadly passed, whose role in their was instrumental in shaping these values. So Louisa Gosling, who passed away earlier this year, was our chair on behalf of WaterAid, and Ton Skelton on behalf of IRC. So we really draw an inspiration from fantastic leaders such as them. So what we've learned over the last 30 years since RWSN was established in 1992 as the Hand Pump Technology Network is that where we can really add value is in three areas. One is around networking, connecting and convening by being a meeting point, a matchmaker, a helpline for rural water professionals. We are provide knowledge brokering services, and we are an information hub. We're a trusted source of guidelines, documented experiences, and evidence. And then third, we identify gaps and develop practical training and technical guidelines and standards where we see that they're needed, and we can bring the partners together to deliver some of those. So throughout this meeting, we'll see examples of all three of these pillars. In terms of what our ambition is for the next 6 years up to 2030, we really want to expand our membership, particularly in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia and the Pacific. We want to increase engagement with women and young professionals, because what's needed is a pipeline of talent into rural water to keep, to attract and sustain a healthy, vigorous, well-informed workforce that delivers great quality rural water services. And we want to increase knowledge exchange at all levels, from global to national levels, and to get that exchange going between different levels and across different geographies, and specifically break down some of the language barriers between French, Portuguese, and Spanish speakers. But as resources allow, we'd love to be able to cater for more languages as well. And then finally, we want to broaden our training and mentoring offer to be the go-to center for professional development, accreditation, certification in the rural water sector, and that the technical and guidelines and standards that we develop are used throughout the world to improve the quality of services. In terms of the scope, I think it's worth just explaining a little bit about what do we mean by rural water supply, because there are actually various different ways of looking at it at different scales and from different viewpoints. But this slide just illustrates that we're trying to serve several goals. So the most kind of narrow and specific goal is about safe, affordable, reliable drinking water in the home. So that is the target of Sustainable Development Goal 6.1. It's also about the human right to water. So these are one of the main targets, the main drivers behind what we do. But we need to acknowledge that people in rural areas are living in, not just using water for drinking, they're using water for many other purposes as well. So there's the water use and safe disposal in and around the home for non-potable uses, including hygiene and sanitation. And that's slightly more broadly, the water needed for nutrition, income close to the home and the neighborhood. So water needed for smallholder agriculture, for livestock, for rural businesses such as bakeries or whatever. And then the wider thematic goals that we want to contribute to are around effective and efficient water supply service delivery and water safety management, and beyond that, water source protection, integrated water resource management, and climate resilience. So we're really going from the tap to the whole of the water cycle and being very intentional about what we're trying to do and at what scale we're trying to operate. And the way we do that is through our themes that you'll be hearing from today. And we have currently 6 themes. We're developing a 7th theme around water quality and safety. And these are fantastic individuals who I'll introduce you to in a second. And together that we work with them to do a range of activities that Aline will explain that include news updates, webinars, mentoring, events, publications, online discussion, and action groups. So a network is about people. So let me just quickly introduce some of the people. So the governing body, RWSN, to explain, isn't a legal entity. It really is a partnership of individuals and organizations. And we've got amazing people. I'm so honored to have fantastic people from these great organizations. Our chair, James, who you've already heard from the World Bank. We've got David from the One for All Alliance, which includes IRC, Water for Good, and Water for People. We've got the African Development Bank, the World Bank, UNICEF, WaterAid, Global Water Center, Helfer, BGR, which is the German Geological Survey, and then my own organization, SCAT Foundation. And then we have the real engine of the network. We have the Secretariat, which is myself, Aline, and Batima. And we work with a fantastic range of theme leaders from all over the world, from all different types of organizations, from government to private sector to NGOs to universities, from Australia to Morocco to South Africa to Ghana to Malawi or Kenya, Nigeria, all over the place. So we're really, it's a really fantastic group of people to work with. And we also have wonderful project partners. But at the end of the day, none of this counts for anything without you, the members, member organizations, because it's your participation in our events and in the networking that makes the network work. So with that, I would now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Aline Sariva-Kalo, who will talk to you, give you some highlights from this year.
Thank you very much, Sean, and welcome everyone to this first annual meeting of RWSN. So if you can move to the next slide. So as Sean said, I'm the network manager of the network. So first, I just wanted to give a bit of highlights. As you already know, the webinars, I think one of the highlights of the activities that we do at RWSN. So this year, we hosted successfully 2 webinar series. The first webinar series was running from April to June earlier in the year. And the second webinar series started on 12th of November and is finishing tomorrow. So please look out to the information on our webinar tomorrow as well. So we have had webinars on Leave No One Behind, Data for Action, and Self-Supply on the earlier year, as well as 3 webinars from the Stop the Rot project, which is one of the initiatives we collaborate with. And then on this late webinar series, we mostly add sponsored webinars with Agenda for Change, with a team from USAID, which you'll hear a bit more about from our Data for Action team leader. We had a collaboration also with Design Outreach, with the REACH program, and with WaterAid. One highlight we had also was the collaboration with WHO. We launched the guidelines for small water systems earlier this year in February. And that was our biggest webinar so far, with over 2,000 people registered and 1,000 unique attendees. If we go to the next slide. So another big initiative we had this year was a collaboration on our mentoring program. So we have been hosting mentoring for young professionals and women of all ages since 2019. But this year we have joined forces with Agenda for Change, and we combined the RWSN program with the Women in WASH mentoring program that Agenda for Change started last year. This has helped us achieve our strategic goal of increasing the number of women in the water sector, and 70% of our mentees and mentors this year were actually female. Some of the improvements that we did on our mentoring program, we now host both onboarding and exit sessions. We had very popular career days earlier in May this year. We had, for instance, a session with Josh from Josh Water Jobs, where he talked about tips for job searching, for getting a new position, for transitioning career, and improving your odds of getting a position in the water sector. We also hosted monthly office hours where we delve deeper in some topics of interest for both mentees and mentors. It was mostly focused on mentees, and some of the meetings were, for instance, about networking, about productivity, about training and finding resources for developing your career in the water sector. So maybe just a shout out to our colleagues that supported the facilitation of this program, and you can put on your diary if you're interested. In February next year, 2025, we'll be doing announcements of the next edition of the mentoring program, and we'll be starting career days in March of 2025. So please keep an eye on this announcement. If you can move another highlight, we had a collaboration with the Stronger Together Alliance, which is an alliance of various women networks and organizations that work in the WASH space. And we hosted a mingle in Stockholm related to this. In terms of publications and website, you might have seen on our social media announcements that we now have a brand new website, and we had a couple of publications by members and organizations we collaborate with. So for instance, one was Who Will Foot the Bill for Sustainable Rural Services by Professor Carter. And then we had the study on capacity needs for rural water professionals, which we recently published with the Global Water Center and QUAST. Next, please. We also contributed to several publications in third-party publications. So for instance, in Latin America with the Voice of Africa of AMCO and several others. If we can move to the next slide. I mentioned already that we have this partnership with Agenda for Change, where we coordinate a lot of activities, and we hosted, for instance, on the webinar series of this late webinar series, the webinar on demystifying system strengthening, which was very well received. We have been engaging with UN Water, particularly with the Innovation Task Group and with the World Water Development Report process. So we have contributed for both the 2025 and we are working towards the 2026 edition of this report. We hosted a member organization event, citing and maintaining solar powered water systems and how to capacitate your staff. You hear a little bit more about it during the groundwater team slot. And we have been sending monthly updates to the network with summaries of what activities we have been engaging with and the key publications relevant for rural water professionals. These newsletters go in English, French, and Spanish and Portuguese. And then we send also the quarterly newsletter, which I should call probably semi-annual newsletters now, given that they went only twice this year, which are bigger digest of resources compiled by our team leaders and our partners that are very relevant for rural water. We have been growing on our social media presence. Our LinkedIn group has now more than 40,000 members. And our page is also growing. Please check them out if you're not following us yet. And we're also collaborating with the Asian Development Bank on the Asia Pacific e-marketplace that was focused on rural water solutions earlier this year. If we move to the next slide. I'll just run through a quick list of updates of the projects that we collaborate with. As Sean had mentioned, one of the key pillars of RWSN is that we are a knowledge broker. So we are knowledge broker partners for some projects that you normally see featured on our newsletters. One of them is the REACH project with the University of Oxford. So we worked with them in several fronts. One has been on this facilitation of the Water Quality Action Group. You might have noticed that now we have a D group dedicated to water quality. So if this is an issue that you are more concerned about, feel free to join this D group to participate and engage more on these discussions. We had a webinar with them focused on chlorination on this late webinar series. And we also supported several initiatives and studies in Kenya and facilitated a publication on the community engagement in Kenya as well. So if you can move to the next. Another project that we have been working with is the Real Water Project with the Quiet team funded by USAID. So this was a project that enabled us to host a couple of events in Stockholm. And one of them was this session on coordinating rural water investments to promote security and stability. So in this session, we were able to convene stakeholders from various multi-development banks, and they had discussion on how to prioritize rural water investments and how to best coordinate efforts among the various development banks and some development partners. And we also supported the Real Water USA exhibition stand in Stockholm. If you can move to the next. One other project that you might have heard a bit from our communications is the SERWASH project, where we collaborate with IDB. It's a project funded by the SDC. So this has helped us to increase our footprint in Latin America. So we hosted also in Stockholm together with them a breakfast meeting with various development partners. We have been collaborating closely with the Susanna network as well to deliver more content and improve the networking in the Latin American space. And we convened several meetings of multiple development banks and a community practice in Rural WASH, also based on this project. And we launched recently a WhatsApp channel for Latin America and hosted several conversations and discussions with networks and associations in LAC. And we have been promoting South-South exchange and learning events within this initiative. We also piloting RWSN artificial intelligent WhatsApp chatbot. This pilot is now mostly with members of the LAC community, but depending on results, we might be extending it to other areas of geographic areas of RWSN. So if we move to the next. I'm already on the hour, so I'll just mention very quickly that we also have the Stop the Rot initiative, which you have heard a lot through our webinars. If you need more details, you can engage with Sean and Kirsten that are leading the project. If you move to the next. And finally, just to mention that we also collaborating closely with the Susanna Forum. We support some of the facilitation of discussions that are happening there. So I think I'll hand over back to Sean to move us to the theme discussions, which I think is something most of you are looking forward to. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Eileen. And yeah, we've rattled through quite a lot there, but it kind of shows you how busy we are and the breadth of activities that we're involved with. But now we're going to move to the next part where we get into the individual themes, and we'll hear from the theme leaders, but also different members, and get some discussion going. So first of all, in this first this morning in this session, we're going to hear from 3 of our 6 themes. So self-supply, multiple use, and data for action. And first up, we have the self-supply theme. So Dr. Tim Foster and Diana Gonzalez from the Institute of Sustainable Futures in Sydney, Australia. And I would love to hand over to you guys to take us through the self-supply theme.
Great, thank you, Sean. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the session today. So Diana and I are very pleased to be able to present to you some highlights from the year for the self-supply theme. And also, we're lucky to have a couple of pictures that will follow, and then some time for some discussion. And we'd also like to take the opportunity to get some of your ideas and suggestions and inspiration for what we can be doing in the coming year as well. So as many of you will know, self-supply is used by more than 1 billion people globally, and that includes more than 700 million in rural areas. So that's about 1 in 6 households. So it's a really big contributor to global water security. But historically, it just hasn't had the attention those numbers suggest it should have. So, you know, for example, very few countries have genuine policy engagement with self-supply as an issue. So as theme leaders, Diana and I are really keen to increase understanding of this form of water supply and engage with the issues that are important to both practice and policy. So this means facilitating and encouraging and promoting discussion, debate, knowledge exchange in a range of fora. And again, we'd welcome your ideas on how we can do this better and deepen our engagement next year. So I'm going to touch on a few highlights before I pass over to Diana. And I should say from the outset, the credit for many of these highlights goes to the many active members within the Rural Water Supply Network, many of whom are self-supply champions. And so we thank everyone who has contributed to the various activities and knowledge exchange that has gone on over the last 12 months. So firstly, I'm just going to touch on policy engagement. So a highlight from this year has been a couple of examples where government in 2 countries in the Asia-Pacific region have really started to engage in self-supply and developing policy frameworks to respond to self-supply. Now, these are 2 countries with huge numbers of people that rely on self-supply, either private rainwater tanks or private wells. So Indonesia, a country of 280 odd million, more than half of the population self-supply their water. So their National Development Planning Ministry has really started to engage in this issue, incorporating into their SDG roadmap and considering it as part of the policy mix within the country. The second country we've got here is Vietnam, another large country with almost 100 million people, a third of whom use self-supply. And UNICEF has really facilitated a process for the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in particular to think about how they develop a policy framework to accommodate the 30 million people who rely on self-supply just for drinking water. So if we move to the next slide, I'm going to briefly touch on some of the really important contributions from I might pass over to Diana for this slide, actually, for the webinar update.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. So yeah, we also had a very engaging webinar earlier this year, and that was part of, as Aline mentioned, part of the early webinar series. And what I wanted to highlight from this is that it was a webinar where we showcased case studies from across 4 continents and specifically talking on supported self-supply. So really following on from the idea that Tim was mentioning about engaging governments, but not just governments. So we talked about different types of supported self-supply. And in this webinar, we had nearly 500 registrations, and also the recording is available if anyone would like to watch that, if you missed it, or if you want to revisit it as well, if you did join. And our next slide, I'll pass over to
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Diana. So one of the other, I guess, methods of outreach we're really trying to promote is elevating the issue of self-supply at key sector events. So we've been lucky enough to have a couple of self-supply sessions at global conferences this year. So the first was at the World Water Forum, which is a high-profile event with more than 20,000 attendees, including a whole bunch of ministerial delegations and world leaders. And it was really pleasing to see a session dedicated to self-supply and linking the issue of self-supply with market-based approaches and market microfinance. So it's quite a holistic view, and it was fantastic to have Lieselot Hedrick, who many of you will know as an active member of RWSN and almost of Nazava Water Filters, and also Amandine Mouret from 1001 Fontaine, also an active Rural Water Supply Network Forum, and again, active member of Rural Water Supply Network. And it was really pleasing to have, again, representation from government in Indonesia and UNICEF, both of whom have a lot of influence in the region. The second event was the IAH World Groundwater Congress in Davos a couple of months ago, and it was a really interesting session with lots of examples of self-supply across different regions: Indonesia, Sweden, Guinea, Zambia, and covering a broad range of issues, both technical and social. And you may recognise another active RWSN member, Holtschlag, who we'll hear from a bit later. And also, it was great to have John Cherry involved, who many of you will know was the 2020 Stockholm Water Prize laureate. So if we can move to the next slide. Another really pleasing aspect of this year was some key publications. And as I said, knowledge exchange and evidence is a really important part of the self-supply theme. And so it was really, really great to see WaterAid share their experiences from 5 countries over 20 years, a whole bunch of key learnings on how they have gone about supporting self-supply, including the drivers and the benefits, the enabling factors, and also the impacts on gender as well. Another one I'd like to highlight is a really interesting perspective piece by George Wainana, who is another active member of RWSN, and Helen Barbosa, who provided a really interesting perspective on why self-supply needs more emphasis, and is really a foundational model. And I'd encourage you all to have a look at that paper if you can. So that's just a few of the papers and publications that really focused on self-supply that I think really moved the frontier of knowledge on this issue, and I think are well worth reading if you get a chance. So if we move it to the next slide, I'll pass it over to Diana.
Thank you. And so we're nearing the end of our introduction before we move on to the pitches. And so with that, this 4 highlights that we share, just an example of what we've achieved this year, and then going forward to 2025, what we've already would like to take into the new year is to continue to highlight self-supply as a key issue, especially at sectoral events. So we're thinking about attending the IWA Water and Development Congress in Thailand. So we are based in Australia, and we're also trying to really bring in the Asia Pacific into the self-supply conversation. So it's a very good opportunity now that the conference is back in our region to bring the topic of self-supply and really highlight it. If there's other events, please let us know, and we can talk about how we can support a self-supply event at other conferences. We also want to support more active online discussions to the D group. There's been some discussion, and we'd like to have a bit more of that in the new year. And we're also thinking about collaborations with the Leave No One Behind theme, especially focusing on self-supply and gender, and research that we have done through our work on this topic about self-supply and gender. It is often thought that self-supply being a household level decision-making environment might empower more women. And that might be true in some cases. In other cases, that's still not a reality. So that's a topic we would like to explore further as well with that theme. And then in terms of priorities, again, on the next slide, we would really love to hear from you. Sean, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we would like to hear from you. What would you like to see in 2025 for the self-supply theme? So if you have any specific activities, types of engagements, initiatives, or opportunities you would like us to lead, or you would like to share with us for us to promote and really take forward or support, we'd love to hear that. And then also in terms of content, if there are any specific themes or topics that you would like to discuss. So please have a think about it as we continue with the self-supply theme part of the conversation. In the meantime, please share your ideas and any emerging thoughts in the chat, and we will be able to revisit them after the pitches. I think that's the next part of our slot. Sean, if you can move to the next slide. So we had an open call for pitches for every theme, and for self-supply, we got 2 submissions. So we're going to go through them. There's 2 presentations. The brief was to share a 3-minute pitch about the self-supply theme or any of the themes. So for us, for self-supply, and we have the first presentation is pre-recorded, is by Rick Hannon from the Jacana Smart Center, Zambia, and then it will follow a live presentation from Henk Holstag from Meta Smart Center Group. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get the recording going. Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Rick Hannon from Smart Center Zambia. Today I want to talk about the sustainable distribution model for sponsored and non-sponsored products. Did you ever come across a project that supplies goods in bulk straight from the factory to serve the bottom of the pyramid? In an emergency situation, this might be the only way, but maybe not in a project that aims at sustainable development. By bypassing the already fragile local shops, the NGOs often destroy the commercial demand. As a result, local shops stop selling the goods, spare parts, and repair services. Here I'd like to introduce an approach where NGOs with the same budget can reach their beneficiaries and, in the meanwhile, also create an ever-growing impact after the project ends. In this alternative approach, we include the already existing shops and that supply chain. Instead of buying the products in bulk at the factory and delivering them straight to the rural beneficiaries, NGOs could provide discount coupons to their beneficiaries instead. Rural shops accept these coupons as partly payment. That way, beneficiaries know where to get maintenance. Shops get free word-of-mouth marketing and additional not sponsored customers. The project enforces quality standards on the shops. After the project ends, each beneficiary has his or her pump, just like in the common approach. As an addition, the NGO can report a growing impact of non-sponsored self-supply customers, since the beneficiary has inspired them, and the project supported the self-supply chain. Jacana develops software to streamline logistics from factory to the end user, include quality control on a distance, and collect evidence of the sponsored products and evidence of the growing self-supply impact. In this case, the product is an affordable portable solar pump for irrigation, but it can be anything else. Have a look at www.self-supply.com and let us know where we can improve. We would like to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thank you, Rick, for sharing that pitch. And now it's over to Henk Holslag from the Meta Smart Center group, who I believe is online and will do a live pitch. So Henk, you have 3 minutes and we'll let you know when your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening, whatever you are. I'd like to share some experience with what we call the supported self-supply model in Africa. We all know the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, the broken pumps, the many people that lack even basic service, so an improved water source at less than 3 minutes walking from home. And one solution can be supporting family level systems. What we mean with self-supply is using innovative and locally produced technologies. And if you talk of wells, it's used by 5 to 10 families. But what is important is the focus on multiple use. So use water for income generation. And that is possible by subsidizing farm wells. Next slide, please. You just heard Rick Hanen from the Jacana Smart Center, and they have the experience with this model, the self-supply, supported self-supply. They subsidize 600 wells with a subsidy, and all these pumps were installed at farm families. And the results 6 years after is that a well of around $1,000 serves 40 people, so that is $25 per person. But the functionality of the pumps is very high. It's over 90%, and that was confirmed by an IRC evaluation. It also created a demand for self-supply. So families who knew they would not get a subsidy started to buy pumps themselves. In Tanzania, a similar model was started in 2008, and by now there's over 15,000 road pumps, of which over 80% are paid for by the families themselves. In Nicaragua, this type of action started even 35 years ago. There is still 50,000 road pumps, mostly on farm wells, and all these farmers, these 50,000 farmers together, increased their income by over $100 million. And this all started with money, $2 million for training. So this indicates the enormous potential for capacity building. Building local capacity and innovation really pays off. Next slide, please. So the impact of this approach is you can reach SDG 6 even in rural areas at an average cost of $25 per person, with the condition that there is 200 millimeters of rain, because if you cannot drill, you can make underground storage tanks and combine them with water filters. So just an indication for the 300 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, that would mean more or less $8 billion. And that is much less than the calculation made by the bigger organization, the World Bank and others. An important effect is you get rid of the maintenance headache of pumps, because there is a clear ownership and there is income generation. So people have money for paying for repairs, but also due to the local production, there is local skills and local spares. And this model also has impact on reducing poverty, increasing food production, gender, creating work, and if you combine it with rainwater harvesting, on climate. So the suggestions for organizations active in rural water supply, we say, is also focus on local production. First, see if you can produce it locally before starting to import. Focus on small wells and for small groups rather than only for large groups. Focus for family managed systems, so where the management of the pump is clear, and focus on productive use also. And all these actions start with the training. And I would like, if there is time, to defend the proposition that to reach basic service in sub-Saharan Africa, it is cheaper and more sustainable to use the self-supply model, the supported self-supply model in this case, than the communal supply approach. Thank you, and looking forward to discussion.
There was some confusion. I might have lost it somewhere. Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Henk, and also in Rick's absence, thank you. Great to get both of those presentations, and lots of interesting issues to consider, and would be great to get any questions that people in the audience might have, and either jot them down in the comment box, or please maybe unmute yourself if that's possible, Aline. I'm not sure if that's allowed, but I guess two observations from those presentations was that they both bring up the issue of intersectoral or cross-sectoral issues and collaboration. So Henk, you may mention food and food production, agriculture, as did Rick's presentation, and also the issue of solar pumping. And if there's one area that's really scaled with a market-based approach, it's off-grid energy and home solar systems. So some interesting parallels and opportunities there as well, which I'd love to talk to you about further on another occasion, Henk. But for this particular moment, it'd be great to get anyone's questions or comments on the basis of those two pictures. I have maybe a question while others are thinking for you, Henk. Just a quick one. Can you maybe just a quick comment on you mentioned water filters there and how they're complementary to the self-supply system. Are you able to just briefly comment on that?
Yeah, water filters, if we promote self-supply, we automatically promote water treatment, household water treatment, either boiling or chlorine or filters. Because one of the main concerns, if we promote self-supply, is what about the quality? Who's going to control the water quality of all these houses? And the answer, of course, is nobody, because that is impossible. But if you include household water treatment with self-supply, then you don't have the risk of unsafe water. I mean, if you boil it or put chlorine or use a filter, then you have covered this concern of water quality. And also, household water treatment is even another solution for urban areas also. I mean, yesterday we had a discussion with Arto from Finland about water quality in Ethiopia, where it appears that almost none of the utilities in Ethiopia can always deliver safe drinking water. So household water treatment, and especially household water filters, can be a solution for urban areas also, where there's no guarantee that people always have safe drinking water. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you, Henk. That does answer the question. And yeah, it's one of the interesting things about the discussion around self-supply. Water quality does obviously come up, but in many countries, not all, but in many countries, the water quality from the public systems, whether they be piped or other communal water points, is no better than what is found in a private well. So I think your point around it being applicable, irrespective of what the source might be, I think is a good one.
The question from James in the chat. Yeah, sorry, there's a question from James in the chat, but maybe I can invite James to ask the question live. James, would you like to come off mute and ask your question to Henk?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I just
Yes.
needed just a little clarification. Henk, thanks for the presentation. If you could just elaborate just a little bit more on your proposition that self-supply is a cheaper option for reaching unserved people, especially looking at reaching people at scale. And related to that, how do you conceptually define self-supply? Is it every household builds their own water supply source, or what? How do we conceptually define self-supply in this sense? And how does that compare, with the communal approach where there is one source having several, households? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you. First of all, self-supplied official definition is where families or groups of families themselves invest in their own water source. That is the definition of self-supply. And with supported self-supply, we mean that that there is some conditions. For instance, we say if we talk about supported self-supply and we talk about wells, then there is one well that you share with 5 to 10 families. Otherwise, of course, a well in general will be much too expensive for one family. But if you have one family that will share water with 5 to 10 other families, then that family can still have their own system. You can support it, and then you have basic service for 5 to 10 families. And I gave the example from Zambia where a manual drilled borehole and a rope pump cost $1,000. And on average, that system serves 40 people. So that is where I get the number $25 from. If there is, and so that is where you can do manual drilling with low-cost drilling, and where you have water levels of 35 meters or less. Where you have water levels of 50 or 60 or 70, of course, you need bigger boreholes, you need the deeper boreholes. Where you have rocks, you need other drilling technologies. So it's not a solution for every situation. But where the manual drilling is not possible, you can store water. There is low-cost water storage tanks, underground tanks. If you combine it with a water filter, a household can also have water for, on average, $25 to $35 per person. So that is where I get the number $25 per person from. But I'm very happy to share documents that give more background information, because the time is too short to give all the information, but it's all written up in a background document.
Thank you, Henk, and thank you, James, for that question. And we have time for one more question. Kabir, would you like to ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll start from where Henk stopped. I will be willing to see that documentation too. Particularly, I'm so much delighted to see this particular area of discussion, which is self-supply, because I'm a water sustainability professional. I have an personal establishment doing groundwater investigation, bore drilling, and other water stability services for people here in Nigeria. So in your presentations, I've not had any part where you mentioned the engagements you had in Nigeria, where people benefited from this self-supply, because fun fact is that my country has more than 220 million population, where about 60 to 75% people lives in the rural area. So we so much need this. And I don't know if you have some engagements in the pipeline that you are willing to collaborate with Nigerian for that's particularly what I want to inquire, and I'll be willing to witness such projects here in Nigeria. And I'm glad this is so much inspiring, and I'm willing to be part of this 100%, because this is just part of me. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Kabir.
Sean.
I think we have to move on. That might be the cue. So we'll just wrap it up there. Thanks, Kabir, for your question and for your comment. And I also saw a question come up in the chat. Very interesting question about climate resilience and self-supply. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up here, but thanks everyone for your engagement and participation, and look forward to continuing our collaboration and contributions to the self-supply theme next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Deanna and Tim, for taking us through that, and also thanks to Rick and Henk for your inputs. Really great stuff, and also thank you very much for everyone's questions and inputs. This is just, in some ways, it's just a taster. This annual meeting, so it will be. Don't see this as the only opportunity. Please continue this conversation bilaterally or on our D groups for each thing. But now I'd like to move on to our multiple use water services, the MUS theme, and Barbara van Koppen, as ever, wonderful, is going to take us through the MUS theme this year. So Barbara, please, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it will be a smooth continuation from the self-supply. I'm talking on behalf of also the other team leaders on MOES, David Smith and Narayan Singh Kawash, who David is traveling and Kawash is doing his PhD examination. So I'm taking the floor now. Thanks. For the next slide, please. Both the highlights and the plans in terms of action. Nepal, with Narayan, Nepal has always been a champion of MOES when the wash and the irrigation sector people started to talk together in the early 2000s. And also I see the Finnish support. There has been a lot of consolidation now in terms of guidelines as well, how to do it, how to do MOES. SUSWA has been working on a design tool that they now will continue working, trying to talk with the Department of Water Supply and Sewerage Management, get it into the official national guidelines and continue the advocacy, also with the help of the MOES Nepal network. And it is an interesting example of mountainous areas where the communal system, the gravity system, is the preferred solution. The water comes down anyhow, so collective, well, at community scale, a couple of hundred households or smaller with storage and then pipes is a good solution. So it's another example where individual solutions like groundwater pumping wouldn't be the most appropriate technology. We see, by the way, in mountainous areas in South Africa, also a lot of communal self-supply related to to nature in a sense. So the action continues in Nepal. We have had the policy dialogue, like what is happening now, and very nicely we could have meet together also with the RWSN team in Stockholm, and I will tell a bit more about that. We are very open to engage in other next year in other webinars, policy dialogues, etc. So please, if you have ideas, let us know. And then lastly, last but not least, we are launching today a white paper on MOES, really capturing the presentations that were made in Stockholm, which captured the state of the art in a sense. And thanks, Aline, for putting it on the link. This is the draft, up till the next year, let's say 6th of January or so. You're all welcome to comment on it. It's open access to comment on it, and so that we can have a final version to publish then the coming year. We will also continue with student research, but let me then go to the white paper now, and how that was, the next slide please, and how that was based on the current state of the art. Big thanks to the team, the RWSN team as well, to help us to get it together. As always, Aline and colleagues, it's great. So we had 4 speakers who told about the progress. Narayan Singh, as I just mentioned, about the guidelines for Moose, how to do it. In Southern Africa, the WaterNet network with universities in the whole of Southern Africa has done very interesting research on how to get multiple use systems depending on the context, the whole range of technologies, how to get them sustainable. But usually it's multiple use anyhow. And Isabel Dominguez of Colombia presented how the 2 decades of dialogue, Colombia was also a champion moose, how that has now reached the national policy levels, where the earlier emphasis on urban supplies, centralized urban supplies, passive payment one system, is now really looking at rural areas, participatory, a range of technologies, making sure that the 3 liter per capita per day that should be clean is clean with appropriate technologies. So really shown how national policy now recognizes, yes, people need water for multiple uses in rural areas. And then James, thanks so much also for your, I think, very innovative thinking about the funding, how to fund multiple use services. You can't define upfront, but how to make implementation of multiple use systems, how to make that financiable and accountable, transparent, etc. Maybe you could share a little bit more on how the World Bank is seeing these approaches now. And then the next slide, please. Maybe also for discussion, really the question how to convey and how to get donor interest for what we now call more and more bottom-up, community-led water services. And in the white paper, we elaborate what I just, the 4 presentations, but also then the arguments again, the really anchoring the multiple use services in what communities do anyhow, especially in low and low income rural areas. Self-supply is also an answer to the fact that there is no service. So the support for the duty bearer, the government, to get at least the basic human needs, the domestic needs, that domestic needs recognized and supported is number 1. But I think all of us, if we would go like the picture, if we would go to a community, a rural community, and we asked, could you please make a resource map of your water? Very quickly, in my experience as well, is that people immediately put their multiple streams, the places where the wetlands, where there is groundwater, which if they know on the map, they will immediately say, here are our homesteads, the fields around the homesteads, the grazing lands, pastoral routes, of course it's even much bigger. They would immediately see, this is where we get water in the wet season, and this is how we get water for our needs in the dry season. And that is then more and more the start, and the big difference of Moose is we start by a diagnostic what is the current situation in the multiple uses, multiple sources and multi-purpose infrastructures, both public, usually a mix now of public supported, maybe tanks or pipes or systems, but also a lot of own self-financed interventions. For example, me coming from the irrigation sector, IMI used to be International Irrigation Management Institute, and now much more the water resources work. Farmer-led irrigation development is now the main endeavor, the main focus. How to support that. So self-supply is on the agenda, but and I will come to that. There is still, if I now go to the bullet points, what are the continuing discussions that we face, the barriers, but also the opportunities. It's not with the communities. For them, it's this is what we want. These are our priorities as on the map. These are our priorities. Can you please help a little bit there? Can you please help there? You have your budget available. You have your technical advice, very important. You have your affordable technologies, as the self-supply team just mentioned. But these are our priorities. Can you make this national incremental improvements? In that community, in the planning phase, the co-design, the problems, going to the bullet points. The issue is, yeah, but it's not my job. In IMI, for example, the argument, yeah, but you also committed to the priority for domestic users. Yeah, but that is for the wash sector. We don't do that. That's for the wash sector. It's changing, but that's then very often the argument. Don't complicate my life even more. Similarly, the wash sector says, no, the productive users, no, the priority should really be domestic. So we can't. And there are problems if a system is just designed for everyone's domestic users. If then some upstream users start using it for production, of course, there are problems. So this notion that the financing is defined for single use, my expertise is about hygiene and about health, or my expertise is about markets for crops and seeds, etc. There has been this tendency. It's not my job. I can't do it. So then the argument is that, yeah, but your job, you are a banker, you invest public money, you are a banker, so can you please calculate all the benefits of your system? And if people use it even illegally and invisibly, it is a livelihood improvement. So be a banker and look really at all the benefits that you are getting from your investment. And of course, multi-purpose infrastructure, where feasible, but often it is, not always. Often it is multi-purpose is just more cost effective than if you have two different systems for the one use and the other use. It's better to have one system, which is a bit more expensive. That's then the issue. It's a bit more expensive to increase the pipes or to increase the tanks, etc. It is more expensive. But the benefits, the overall benefits are much higher. And of course, the technology is the same. You showed the little portable solar pump for irrigation, but they can also put it at the household for the domestic users in a tank for the night then. So the technologies are they are similar. And to get that collaboration, makes all sense. Well, then the second bullet point, of course, if it is really participatory in the planning phase, then it will hopefully be more sustainable, but the chances are much higher. So the sustainability has all to do with the buy-in, the co-design in the planning phase already. And then in that collaboration, going to the third bullet point, leaving no behind. The wash sector, I think, doesn't, I keep talking about sectors. The wash sector doesn't realize the power of getting everybody on the agenda, because everybody needs domestic water for domestic uses. Everybody is on the agenda. But for productive uses, yeah, the one has a bit of small scale livestock, the other has cattle, somebody else, the pastoralist has a completely different lifestyle in the sense some people have plots around their homestead, other people have plots further away. So that the diversity is not easy to capture in a nice statement, because it depends on the local situation. But to work together and keep the priority for domestic uses as the responsibility of all people, also my colleagues in EMI, also the integrated water resource management, even the nexus approaches, the food, energy, water nexus, etc. They still they tend to forget about WASH. And it's very interesting, for example, that FAO, also a moose champion, has now revalued moose, as they call it, to include the treatment for drinking water, the technologies to treat water for drinking. And that's where the expertise of the WASH sector is very important. But then for multiple use systems, yeah, so also not all water needs to be clean for drinking, but it is that bit that is needed, which is very important for moose as well. And in that regard, from a gender perspective, I don't understand why the WASH sector only talks about drinking water, because everybody knows that you need water for food, for cooking, food processing, cleaning, washing, laundry, bathing, etc., for which you don't need that quality. Yeah, I think the issues on who is taking responsibility for domestic uses has really been sidelined in the past years. So from a gender perspective, it was my own motivation to get to moose. In fact, from a gender perspective, all domestic users need to be on the agenda as a responsibility for both men and women, which is then, yeah, is in discussion.
Barbara,
So
sorry to interrupt you. Could we move to give people an opportunity to discuss a bit as well? Is that okay? Because we've only got 10 minutes left.
Oh, time flies.
Sorry, I know it's really great stuff. It's really great.
But then
maybe the last couple of points.
Yeah. Last point is that, well, okay, the last bullet point is then that there are important developments well outside the WASH sector on the community-based water tenure, and also the special rapporteurs human right to water has now given a policy that water for life should have a priority. Second, water for general interest, and only then economic uses. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Don't worry, I'm sure there'll still be an opportunity to come back to some of these points, but I think yeah, let's move on to the next slide.
So yeah, these are the real seeing that. So these are the questions. What are the opportunities and obstacles for moose, and then also as RWSN as a platform for exchange? How can we already collaborate a lot with the self-supply theme. The issue of the financing, which remains key, how to make the arguments in the World Bank, in other donors, nationally, etc. Broader climate funding is broadly defined. Yeah. Let me see whether I didn't have time. Yeah, these are the. Maybe, James, could I put you on the spot to elaborate a bit more on the how the issue of the financing is going, as you started presenting in Stockholm as well. I don't know whether James is still.
Maybe we've just lost him for a moment. Yeah, if there's anyone else who has any questions, I think this is Barbara. I think one of the points that you raise, I think, is really resonates about this issue of it's not my job. And I think this is that I've come across this in many actually way back about nearly 25 years ago, when I was working for the Environment Agency in the UK, and we were talking about sustainable urban drainage systems, SUDS. And this was a system that created multiple benefits in terms of flood risk reduction, pollution risk reduction, improving the public realm, all these kind of benefits that are kind of really tangible. But what really made it so difficult to implement is that nobody could agree whose job it was to kind of build and maintain these systems, because everyone was going, well, in the legislation, that's drainage is your job, or flood risk is your job, or public space is your job. And I feel that multiple use kind of suffers from a similar problem that as you perfectly described, that in these complex systems that the agricultural people just go, agriculture is hard enough as it is, don't give me wash as well. And so what would be your advice? What's been your experience on having those conversations of just bridging that gap between disciplines to tease people out of their shells and say, look over here, look, this is really good.
Well, that's why we try to keep giving the arguments why it would make sense at the higher levels for the policymakers who allocate in the end the funding. And it happens anyhow. The arguments are strong, but the financing streams are often defined so narrowly that there is no incentive to go beyond. And I think the way in which the communities are not listened to at the bottom up, there is no incentive. I don't see a very clear process that we really start with the priorities of the communities. And there may be an issue of accountability, because if like climate funding or drought management, it's all about water. If you leave it open, you have to follow what is happening on the ground. There needs to be a clear monitoring system that well, as you said, that doesn't say there are pipes, or James, you mentioned, there are pipes, but there is water. And there is no strict monitoring system on, is there water? As Henk also mentioned, what are the data that about the performance of investment, and then it's very easy for contractors and engineers to come and just put whatever they know and then go, and then yeah. So it is both people and the funders. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Henk, you've got a question. Do you want to jump in? Henk, do you want to unmute?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I was muted. Yeah, you, Barbara, thanks for the presentation, and I think we are overlapping a lot with the difficulties on getting the approach across and getting funding. Can one source for funding not be the leave no one behind zone? I mean, we all agreed with the SDG 6 that everyone should have safe water by 2030. And so the people that don't have even basic service or don't have water treatment, could that not be another source? So talking it from the human right perspective, so the people that lack basic service or lack safe water have the same right to the subsidies that people that already have basic service or safely managed service received already. Is that something that you have discussed or thought about, over?
But no, that's the point. But then the productive uses are so diverse. So the beauty of everybody needing water for drinking is a very strong advocacy message. Because everybody, oh yeah, I know that everybody's immediately on the agenda. But I fully agree that the argument for productive uses of the same everybody is a very strong point of this collaboration between sectors. Absolutely.
Yeah. And to go on with the other question, why is it so difficult that the wash sector sees the potential of MUSE? I have the same question for many years. Last year we had this conference on the IRC on All Systems Connect, which means that we need to connect the wash sector with health, with energy, with agriculture. So it is widely promoted already for many years that we should connect sectors. And I still don't know why it takes so much time to really connect the sectors, because we all want to do it, we all see the benefit, but it doesn't happen enough. And that's maybe we should contract some marketeers and see how we can improve our message, how we can make it better understandable. Maybe we should put more money to it and say, if you do it different, you save money and less, and instead of investing more. I don't know, what is your vision, Sean? Why is it so difficult? Why does it take so long?
I think it comes down to, I think maybe what I said earlier about just how we handle complexity. And when people have very busy, complex jobs, they try and focus, and they, what is my job? What am I getting paid to do? and kind of push everything aside. And that just seems to be something that happens with solutions that are kind of, deliver multiple benefits, but are complex because they require coordination of multiple actors. But I agree, it is possible. It has been done in other things, and we should try and do it. We're running out of time, so maybe Barbara, before we move on, is there any final comments you want to make? Because you've
Muti had a question as well, I saw, but now his hand disappeared.
Okay, well,
no, it's fine. I'll just write my question in the chat. It's more of a comment.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks. Yeah,
great. Well, if that's it for that, I would just like to, Barbara, thank you so much. I mean, you've got so much wisdom and experience in this. It's lovely to kind of draw on that expertise, but also with Narayan and David as well. You're such a great team, and I really urge people to read the white paper, to respond to it, and we can take this forward next year There's lots of opportunities to produce a publication, do some webinars, do some advocacy around this, get people, as you say, Hank, get people excited about it, that this is a real opportunity. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Barbara. Very appreciated. Okay, so now we move to the our final theme of this session, which is data for action. So let me just share my screen again. And I think it is over to Muti, who we just heard from. So Muti, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you are. My name is Muti Shema. I think you can click twice, Sean. I realize I put some animations in there. So I'll be presenting our progress report as well as our plans for next year. As mentioned, my name is Muti Shema. I work for an organization called Baseflow, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my colleague, Mutala Abdul Mumim, who's with WaterAid. He couldn't make the session today, but I'll be presenting on his behalf as well. Next slide. So what were some of the activities for the year? We had quite a few webinars, and we also had RWSN webinars, but also other webinars that were done in partnership with other people, other institutions. So I'll first of all start with webinars that were set up through RWSN. So one of the first webinars of the year, in the first webinar at the first half of the year, was on artificial intelligence and looking at how artificial intelligence is being used in water management. So trying to really understand what the opportunities are, the effectiveness, but also limitations and ethics. So we had some very interesting presentations by Olivier from Wash AI, who was showing how he's using artificial intelligence to simplify our search for WASH knowledge and information through his platform of Wash AI. So it was a very interesting session around how he's using AI to help gather WASH information. But also we had Snehal, who is from Nature Dots, who was looking at how she's using artificial intelligence to help farmers, fish farmers in various parts of Asia, where she's using various data sets, whether it's rainfall data, flood data, fish patterns, bringing all of that information into one platform to give information to fish farmers in terms of how they can manage their fish better. So it was a really fascinating presentation on how all that data is coming together. And of course, from Dr. Ajay, we're looking at the ethics of artificial intelligence. What are some of the elements of ethics we need to be concerned about? And as water practitioners, the element of that, I think someone said that if you just type one search in ChatGPT, you consume about 20 liters of water. So there is a water footprint to artificial intelligence. So what are we as professionals supposed to do about that? Next slide, please. The next webinar that we did much later in the year, one I'm very excited about, was a partnership. I think Aline mentioned that we partnered with USAID through their data program. It turned out that they were also interested in some of the work that we were doing, because for the year, we wanted to find new ways of engaging our members. So rather than just doing your standard webinar, we wanted to see, could we find ways of solving data problems that members actually have? So we were thinking about that as RWSN, and it worked out that also USAID, through our colleague there, Katie Seal, who's also a member of RWSN, were having the same conversation. So we teamed up for this webinar, which is the first in what we're calling the Data Clinic. And it's a webinar series. So the first one was looking at the WASH Atlas, which is done by the Spatial Data Repository, the DHS program, which is a very interesting platform because they're looking at trying to look at water coverage or sanitation coverage at various administrative levels. So usually, like I'll use Malawi as an example. Malawi is broken into regions Those regions are broken into districts. Those districts are broken into what we call traditional authorities. So there are different levels in terms of how a country is broken down. And they were showing us how their platform can show their analysis broken down at about 2 administrative levels. And it's very interesting that the closer or the more granular the analysis, the more the confidence level gets less and less. So it was a very interesting, and there was a lot of discussion around that. And what made this a very interesting session was how we had the first open office hours after the session. So the main session was 1 hour, but then we had 30 minutes of office hours for those who wanted to engage directly with the operators of the platform. So it was a very interesting session. Next slide, please. So just some very quick statistics. I'll not go through it too much. We had, for the artificial intelligence session, we had well over 1,000 people registered, and we had about 454 attending. For the data clinic, we had a maximum online viewership of 187, but I want to draw your attention to the number of people. We actually were very surprised with the number of people who stayed on for office hours. Initially, we were expecting only maybe 10 or 12 people. We had well over 50, I think it was 65 people that had stayed on. So it was really interesting that people wanted to engage directly in a more interactive format with the speaker. And of course, those are some of the scores in terms of satisfaction with the data clinic. Next slide, please. So these were, those are the RWSN activities that we did during the year, but we also had other engagements through other platforms. So there's an organization called WASH Web. They're also having their own webinar series, and we were invited to speak on partnerships for an improved WASH data ecosystem. So my colleague Mutala, my co-lead, presented on RWSN in terms of what it is RWSN does, but also trying to share what data for action is about and how we're using data for action to establish these partnerships to improve the WASH data ecosystem. So Mutala presented at that particular session. Next slide, please. And of course, we also were at the World Water Week in Stockholm this year, as were many other members, theme leaders on this call. And I presented on unlocking the hidden potential of open WASH data. This is a continuing and growing relationship with WASH Web, really looking at trying to institute open data practice. So this is going to be a very interesting partnership to observe. And it was really looking at, there were several presentations. My presentation was really looking at how we can get governments to be more open with their data. So it was a very interesting session, which happened on my birthday, I would like to add. Next slide, please. So moving forward, I'll just share there was one other activity that we did during the course of the year, and that was developing terms of reference for an action group. After we were inspired by the Stop the Rot action group, we wanted to set up our own action group, but specifically looking at developing a practice guide. Now, this practice guide is going to be a kind of handbook. If any country or organization wants to establish a national management information system, what are some of the steps? What are some of the challenges? What are the things you need to think about if you're looking to establish a national management information system for WASH anywhere in the developing world or developed world if it doesn't exist? So we developed terms of reference for this action group. We are currently in the process of trying to mobilize people who could be part of this action group. We're looking at it being a relatively small group so that we can coordinate better and manage things better within the team. But this is something we're looking forward to activating in 2025 so that we can start the process of developing the practice guide and writing it so that it can be available to members of the Data for Action thematic group, as well as the wider network for RWSN. But also the partnership with USAID will continue with that. We have made a joint decision to make this something more regular. So we're going to have quarterly data clinics where we'll look at specific tools that people are using. How does that tool work? what decision is that tool helping us answer? And of course, have office hours where we engage with the creators of the tool or the operators of the tool to really get down to the basics of how that tool actually works. So these are some of our ideas for Data for Action for next year, what we've done and what we're looking to do moving forward in the year. So I would love to hear from you as if you're a member of the Data for Action thematic group, or if you're not, you can join. But I just want to hear from you. What are some of the things that you need as members? Because one of the reasons why we set up the data clinic was because we wanted to engage more directly with you, so that we're hearing from you the problems you're having with data, and we're responding directly, rather than the webinars add value and they create connections, but we wanted to find a way of engaging in a more meaningful way with you. So are there other ideas that we are not seeing or not exploring? So I hand over to you. What are some of your ideas? We're very open to listen and collect that data so that we can analyze it. So yeah, over to you, Sean. Well, maybe not Sean. Over to the members in terms of what ideas you might have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Muti. That's really great, and a really great overview of all the really great connections you've been making and the collaborations you've been building, which is really what RWSN is about. That we don't do stuff alone. It's like finding people who are doing something similar and going, wow, let's collaborate, because then we can build something a lot stronger. So that's really
and that's a very good point, because you say it has its network, it has its legitimacy, as do we. So I think what we have brought to the partnership is the network that we have, the 40,000 odd members that we have on through our social media. So it's been a mutually beneficial relationship for both parties, which is why we are going to continue it into the new year.
Yeah, great. So if anyone's got any questions, I'm just checking the chat box to see if there's anything, or anyone wants to raise their hand and make a comment, then please do so, because data underpins just about everything, particularly when it comes to a lot of the decision making that we want to see happen.
I think while people are deciding what questions to ask, I think just how can we join the process? Oh, Kabir has asked a question. Hi, Kabir. I hope it's not too hot in Nigeria. Here it's quite hot from some of the reports I've seen. But yeah, I think Aline will share some of I think in the chat, what the process is for joining. We have a D group where sometimes we share emails or just information or white papers or studies or work that different organizations are doing. Sometimes people have opportunities they can share on that group. So the D group is there and you can join it. So I would ask Aline to just post in the chat and not just for Data for Action, but for all the groups. So you can choose which one you'd like to join. You can join more than one. So just so that you're free to join any which one that you feel aligns with your interests. Yeah, I think I see Henk has raised his hand. Over to you, Henk.
Thanks for your presentation, Muti. Always impressive. So we had this discussion on data of small wells, like in Malawi. I know there's many thousands of these low-cost wells in Dambos made by Mary Medical Mission, by Wells for Zoe. Do you include those in your database also?
Sorry, Hank, I was the network was breaking up. Were you asking, do the databases include small wells? Or is this the database for Malawi or just generally?
Well, let's start with Malawi and then maybe generally, but it would be, we have been talking about self-supply and self-supply being able to supply small groups. So it would be nice, of course, to have the data of those wells also included. But I understand that's very difficult. But do you intend? Is it an idea to try to get more self-supply and more small wells into the database also?
I think in principle, yes, it's something that should actually be done, because if we are looking at managing or regulating water resources, you do need to know who is actually tapping into the water resource beyond just the communal points that you mentioned, but also family managed ones, because I think all of them are using the water. So it's important to get a sense of what the scale of the abstraction is. And of course, I did receive your email recently. And then seeing you on the call, I remembered I haven't responded to you, so I just responded to your request. So you should see an email from me in your inbox. But in principle, yes. As long as we're looking at trying to manage a water resource, you need to know who is tapping into that resource, whether it's private sector, whether it's public sector, whether it's communities or farmers. We need to know who's tapping into it so we can manage the resource better. So yes, it is valuable information.
But it also would be interesting for the point of view of functionality. I mean, it would be interesting if you have both community and family managed systems. You could compare functionality rates of both groups also. That's another interesting data that you could collect from this, is it?
Yeah. No, yes, of course. I think one of them, and I know this is something that's of interest to you as an advocate of self-supply, and that is really trying to shift governments to actually seeing the value of self-supply. I mean, I found your presentation a little earlier quite interesting, particularly the experience of Nicaragua. And I think you mentioned Zambia as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Zambia and Tanzania, yeah, 3 countries.
And Tanzania, yeah. So actually looking at the traction that it's received, and particularly the issue of functionality. So I think information like that, I think, would shift the needle to getting more people being less skeptical of self-supply. Because I know, as you do, that I think some of the skepticism is, yes, there was the issue of water quality,
right?
And I think there's a kind of stigma towards locally sourced materials and locally sourced or manufactured hand pumps as compared to things that are imported. So there's a stigma around that as well. So having evidence like that to say there are this many thousand, I think in Nicaragua, I think you said 50, was it 50,000?
50,000, yeah.
50,000. And this is the functionality or how it's actually working. I think it would help to shift the needle. So just like Sean said, data underpins everything. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you. Okay, I've just seen some. Okay, Harold, let's see. Have you looked at issues concerning integrated water supply, sanitation data from various databases in countries like Malawi? Multiple agencies utilize different databases, even though there's a national database in place. Have you conducted any research to explore the potential for these databases to contribute to national? I think it's an interesting area where we can learn from. Thank you, Harold. Well, I think as a group, we've not done research necessarily. And you're right, this is quite a serious problem, not just in Malawi, but I think it's generally across Africa, where you have multiple databases. And just like Sean said, people sometimes focus on their work. When it comes to data, it's kind of the same thing. People just love their databases. So to actually bring all of that together, maybe not even bring it together, to get people to share information is already quite a challenge. And I think the work that we want to do next year with Mutala from WaterAid, where we want to really set out what is the roadmap to building a national management information system. Now, as part of that, what we could do is within that, one of the things we would be interested in trying to understand is why do people not share information? What there's already a lot of information out there about that, but to still try to, in such a handbook or in such a guide, to actually say, be wary of these things. This is how you deal with the problem of, there's a term called data silos. So there are a lot of data silos out there, or there's a lot of data egos where people want to be the ones to cling to the data themselves. So within this guide, we are also going to look at those kind of practical things. How do you break data egos? How do you break data silos? And there may be a little bit of research in there to make things happen, to actually capture that and put it in the guide so that people can learn from other countries in terms of how they've been dealing with that particular problem. So yeah, so Harold, we haven't done research yet, but within the handbook, we will look at problems of data egos and data silos and how those can be broken to facilitate one database. Yeah. I don't know if there are any other questions. I've noticed there's a lot. You're welcome, Harold. I noticed there's a lot of chat about the D group, so I think that's being handled. Okay. For those of you who are interested to get onto the D group, I think there's just been a temporary technical problem, but that will be resolved. But if you want to go on our LinkedIn, you can search for us on LinkedIn, but we are also on Twitter, and I believe Facebook. Yes, and Facebook. Yes. So you can check us out there. Any other questions for me or suggestions for the Data for Action? Are there other ideas you'd like us to explore next year? It could be a topic for a webinar. Maybe there's a particular topic you're interested in that you'd like us to explore. Any ideas? Welcome.
Yeah, Muti, maybe I think I love the idea of a practice guide for national monitoring systems. I think there's a real need for that. We're seeing through the SareWash program that we've been involved with IDB, there's really interesting things happening in Peru, in Haiti, but then also in other countries. So it's like a lot of almost parallel evolution of these systems, and I think it would be really nice to draw together what's been learned. So Deanna, sorry, over to you.
Hi, Diana.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I was pinned because I had my hand up.
No, it's fine.
I think when you were doing your introduction, Muti, and thanks so much for I learned a lot about your theme. I haven't been as engaged with it, but I think it raised for me a question about, sorry, when you were talking about AI and the footprint, the water footprint about AI, I've been thinking about this a lot myself because I think it gets brought up a lot. And sometimes I wonder if it would be ethically just to limit common people's access to and use of AI because of the water footprint. And I think that is where the comment goes to often is like, you know, limit your access or use of AI because of the water footprint. And I think, yeah, sometimes I wonder about the equity and inclusion aspect of that. And I know, like, my question is like, you know, who is being left behind from AI in the same way of who's being left behind in water? Not to the same, it's not the same scale of the issue, obviously, but I think the question really is more, and it's not a formed question, as you can tell. It's about the question of equity in access to data more broadly and more widely. And I wonder if that's a theme or a topic that you've explored as a theme of like, yeah, equity and inclusion around access to data, management of data, data for whom as well. And sort of, yeah, I was inspired by the comment about the water footprint using AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very difficult question, Diana. Yes, okay, equity and inclusion with regards to data access. This is not something we have explored. And I think it's not because it doesn't come up. I think it sort of comes up in passing in various conversations, and a lot of it is around. It normally comes around when we're talking about open wash data, particularly in terms of what data is available and free for people to access, who owns that data, what data is being monetized, and what does that monetization do for the sake of access, particularly if we're talking about students or young professionals in the global south, or even, oh my goodness, even small organizations working in the global south that don't have big budgets, but they need data to do the work that they need to do. So a lot of the conversation has sort of hovered around stuff to do with access to data, but particularly when it comes to monetizing it, what data is actually available for people to access and what data is not available. I know during the talk we did in Stockholm, that did come up, the question of how do you engage government when it comes to the question of monetization? Do you tell them you're supposed to give it for free? Sort of appeal to their good nature or to their humanitarianness? Or do you meet them halfway, where some data is monetized and some isn't? Then negotiating that. So it's a conversation that has come up specifically in the area of monetization and how that limits access to data, particularly for organizations and peoples in the global south. But it's not something we've tackled directly as a particular issue. But I would love to have more of a conversation, because I know the subject of equity and inclusion could be quite broad. And being an able-bodied person, there are probably certain elements that I don't realize that I have privileges in. So I would really love to have a broader conversation, just to pick your brain. Trust your question may be unformed, but my response is equally unformed. So I would really want to understand where your mind is at, because I would be very fascinated to have a conversation around how does equity and inclusion manifest itself when it comes to watch data. And again, it might be an opportunity to team up with Leave No One Behind group and see how we can make that work.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Mitty. You to handle that question really well. Difficult.
No, thank you very much. You're welcome. We have 3 minutes to go. So Hank is asking topics for webinars. What about Reach SDG 6.1 in rural Africa? Yeah, okay, fine. Very, very specific. All of Africa. Well, okay, because I know Hank, I could take this up with you after, but I just wanted to invite anyone else. You can put your webinar topic in the chat, just like Hank has done, or if you just want to pose a question. So any suggestions for webinars or any questions? We've got 2 minutes to go. I really liked Diane's question about equity and inclusion, because I was like, oh, actually, how does that manifest?
Yeah. Well, I'm skeptical about the water footprint of AI, because I think yes, there's been a lot of noise about it, but there's every IT thing that's come out, there's been a big kind of hoo-ha, like the water footprint of YouTube or the water print. Its thing is, it's not a consumptive use. It's not like when you use AI, water is destroyed. It's so. I think it needs to be seen within context of broader water use, non-consumptive and non-consumptive. Water footprint stuff gets pretty gnarly pretty quickly, I think. But
we've got a minute to go, but I just wanted to make a brief comment on that. I was talking to someone that sometimes people try to dumb down information for the general population. It's like, oh, if you put in one search item into ChatGPT, you're consuming 20 liters of water. And it's like, okay. No, I mean, I'm not downplaying the water footprint of AI. That may be there, but I think it's really the question of whether it's a bit too alarmist to some extent. And then it goes to the question of what Diane asked: should we limit people's access to technology? Then it becomes, you get into very dicey areas there.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank all team leaders and basically everyone who's been on the call today. Wonderful presentations, wonderful discussion. And to round off this session, I'd like to hand back to James for his reflections and closing remarks.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Muthi. As always, very exciting conversations. I have a suggestion there that we may consider. Does increased data lead to improved services? Understanding the causal pathways. I have had very bad experiences. Especially with innovations around water ATMs that is envisioned to bring a lot more transparency in service delivery. But I have examples of cases where it turned out to be a disaster. The communities were so mad at all these data innovations, went and uprooted all this ATM system because they could not show any relationship between these advanced data systems, and the utility would still take a month to come and repair a broken pipeline, yet they have a super dashboard showing all the data of performance and money collected. So it would be interesting to drill down to the to the depth of it and establish the real causal pathways, or under what conditions can data really lead to improved services. Thank you so much, colleague. These have been very exciting conversations in the last 1 hour or so. I really wanted to highlight, the presentation on, building local markets. I think it wasn't Hank, it was the presenter before Hank, the smart people on, working through markets. As I mentioned in my opening remark, that one of the things that we have really to commit to is to embed sustainability in how we design the rural water supply programs. And one of the things that we have to consider in sustainability is not to do more harm to the local markets, because there are markets existing in some of these areas that are bridging a very huge gap. So when we come with free subsidies, externally driven initiatives that does not really consider what was working in the local market, but you end up doing a lot more harm, because the danger with that, you will come with your program for 1 year, super support, big subsidies, then it completely destroys the local, for example, spare part markets and everything. Then you leave after 1 year, your free services will no longer be there, and the markets that were there providing those services have been destroyed over that 1 year. So it's a double tragedy for those communities. So that's one thing that I really want to, I think as a sector, we really have to commit to and really give more consideration in terms of how do we ensure that our support to communities that need services do not further harm the communities by destroying, some markets that they were not perfect, but they were working. So it's better that we leveraged, the support that is coming in to build stronger systems that were there already. If there was a market that was nascent and developing, we do a lot more in terms of developing that market. So overall, I think very exciting conversations, more to discuss. A lot of this we can pick up. I'm sorry, Barbara, I didn't come in on the multiple use financing. I got distracted for a minute there, but I think these are conversations we'll continue having as we finalize the white paper and everything. Mine is just to thank you so much, for taking your time, for being here, for contributing to these conversations. The Rural Water Supply Network is really a membership network. It's not some super external organization. It only exists to the extent of your active participation in the webinars, in the annual meetings, in the specific meetings that are called. So thank you so much for taking time to contribute. As I mentioned earlier on, there's another round later this evening. You are still free to join those if you are able to set time apart for that. But just to say thank you so much. There is a survey, please. If you could take a survey at the end of this, of the webinar was. We really appreciate that very, very much for you. Thank you so much. This is my closing remarks. Back to you, Sean. Yeah. If there's anything you want to close up with, yeah.
No, thank you very much. I think that's great. Yes. So just to confirm that later today we will be the first part will be the same in terms of the presentation that Aline and I gave about the overall network, but then the second part will be different because we'll be hearing from Leave No One Behind, sustainable services and sustainable groundwater development. So if you'd like to and can join for that part as well, then please do. Otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you. You can leave at your pleasure now.
Thank you. Bye.